So we've got a few things to talk about on the show today. I will say today we might be cutting out just a little bit early, but that's only because I want to give some time to a particular segment. I was originally just going to quote extensively from it, but I think at the end of the program today, I'm going to play a segment from Democracy Now! Talking about some foreign policy stuff with China, which I think it's a really important topic, especially what just happened, over the weekend, over the week, the tragedy. We've got yet another case of white supremacist terrorism. Of course, if you go back to the guy's documents, somebody pointed this out, and there's something just really kind of poignant in pointing out the ridiculousness in the sort of sardonic way that that this guy in his confession, where he confesses that he murdered several people, he blamed his sex addiction or something. That there's layers of just thick toxic misogyny in there, but said that it's not a race thing. I'm not racist. White people are literally more comfortable admitting that they murdered people, that they might have some racial biases, and again, it goes back again to that sort of there's these broader cultural discussions and issues. The white officer that said the guy was just having a bad day, and it turns out he had a bunch of like China virus race baiting stuff on his own social media account. There's this disconnect. And it's a long discussion about the perils of color blindness versus acknowledging racial differences in history and systemic racism. Because it's gotten to the point where people like this individual go out and murder a bunch of specifically Asian people, but can misconstrue it to himself and others that, it's not a racist thing. I just went on a racist rampage. What's the qualifier there? He wasn't wearing a Klan outfit when he was, gunning those people down. Anyway, but yeah, I thought that was particularly important because I think there's broader cultural discussions that are going into all the xenophobia going on. And it's not exclusive to the kind of race baiting Trump camp either. I look at the last several years of discussion, and this is what the segment later on from Democracy Now! Really digs down on this, is this attempt to kind of paint China and that section of the world as an opponent and a forthcoming like sequel to the Cold War. Which again, there's not a lot of bipartisan consensus on stuff, and even in the last administration, there wasn't as much consensus on foreign policy. But one thing that Republicans, Democrats, and sadly even like some progressives and social democrats can get around is painting China as the next big bad, and posturing against them in such a way to try to propagandize American citizens into think that China is some sort of existential threat. And here's the thing: if you do that, and if you continue to do that over years and years and years, that is going to bleed into the cultural consciousness, and it's going to create this environment where you can have people over the last year who have been harassing Asian folks and who go on these killing sprees, because again, it leaks into the kind of the cultural hegemony of the United States, that people perceive Chinese folks and people who look Chinese, because again, much as what happened to our Muslim brothers and sisters, and not even Muslims, people with brown skin from that part of the world. White supremacy is not a very, they discriminate, but they don't really discriminate. They can't really see nuance. So if you look vaguely Asian, you are part of this Cold War diaspora that needs to be opposed and harassed, and in the case of what happened the other day, murdered. But I'm really trying to dive down here that like this is a deep cultural issue, that it's not even just because of Trump. It's because we've had we are setting up this new conflict. And while there hasn't been this flashpoint moment like 9/11 that has really just amped up hate crimes, COVID in its own way was able to do that because, again, there's a lot of hateful stupidity in this country, and people decided because the virus came from China, you need to go beat up people who are or may be Chinese. Um, but everybody's, and when I say really like the establishment and the propaganda, everybody's hands are filthy when it comes to what happened the other day. And a lot of us are complacent, and a lot of us are complicit. If you've been sharing these liberal articles about, China is the enemy, like, I saw this meme going. It's like the Economist. So I used to actually subscribe to the Economist back in the days, kind of like a half like know your enemy. Also, they did some substantive journalism on global affairs before I really got into like Marxism and stuff, which you don't really get from American press. But if you look at like say the cover of Economist, which is just this it's as close to as a centrist magazine as you can get in this day and age, because like neolibs and neocons they both read it, all that. Um, like it seems like every other month there's a cover where it's like the red menace, like looking towards China is a big economic threat, as we'll be talking about in that video later, or as they'll be talking about in that video later. Even the Biden administration is talking just as in hawkish terms towards China as the previous administration did, if not more so. Let's not forget, during the Obama years, the last bit of his legacy was trying to build the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which for everything else that we were concerned about as far as its authoritarian overtones or implications, its ability to basically give corporations carte blanche to sue municipalities. One of the big underlying threads of that is Obama was desperate to get this passed because he again to compete with China, to overcome China in their center of the world, which is basically mostly to this point, thank goodness, been more of like kind of a cold economic war or dispute. But as history has shown us, these prolonged economic spats can turn into a hot war. It really was a lot of luck of history that what happened between the United States and the USSR never escalated to that point. But if there's this really great article from World Socialist website where I would recommend this book. I read some interviews about it, but it was Daniel Ellsberg, The Doomsday Clock. Now he's most famous for leaking the Pentagon Papers, but he also published this book recently about like being in the military-industrial complex at that time, talk about how they were scenario gaming what nuclear war / Armageddon would look like. And the United States is currently doing that kind of scenario gaming with China, while at the same time building up, creating military buildup near China in their sphere of influence, being very provocative, while China on the other side is trying to de-escalate things. And whatever else you have to say about China, that is what they are doing in terms of their relationship with the US. They are attempting to de-escalate. They're trying to be diplomatic, while the US is being hawkish and trying to build up China as an enemy, up to and including propagandizing our current population to oppose China. And again, what starts at the top as this kind of economic manufacturing of consent leaks down right into the most toxic bits of society, to where you will have guys like this white supremacist doofus go out and murder a bunch of people because he's got some weird sexual insecurities and racism intertwined and mixed up together. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more later in the show, but I also did want to cap off that thought in thinking about there's this just this statement from Center for Communist Studies. I'm not going to read the whole thing, But they released a statement that really resonated with me. So I'm just going to read a chunk of it. On Tuesday, a white man shot and killed 8 people, 6 of them Asian women, at 3 different Georgia massage parlors. The police have noted the murderer may have been struggling with a sex addiction and might have been acting out his pathologies. The information is offered as both explanation and excuse, as is customary when the police and the capitalist media discuss the acts of violence and terror committed by white men. Cherokee County Sheriff spokesman Captain Jay Baker, a former employee of the U.S. mercenary outfit Blackwater, that's interesting to note, kind of the way imperialism and racist policing intertwine, opined that the murderer was simply having a bad day. And just as a little bit of an aside, that's ridiculous. I can't believe I'm hearing that in real life. That is literally something like that's from comic books. That's from the Killing Joke. You know, that's an excuse for the Joker. you don't, you do not apply that to real life mass murderers. Anyway, a lengthy history of white violence, often sexual in nature, places Asian women, and especially those working in the service sector, in a position of exceptional vulnerability. The material history of this violence, as well as the discursive practices of violence both at home and abroad, evidence an equally lengthy history of anti-Asian violence perpetrated by the United States, such as, and I'm just going to read down the list here, U.S. involvement in the opening Opium Wars, People versus Hall, 1854, a California Supreme Court ruling that barred people of Asian descent from testifying against whites in court. The exploitation of Chinese immigrants in the most dangerous and grueling of work conditions, including garment factories, railroads, mining. The massacre of 1871, which is a mass lynching of 17 Chinese people by a predominantly white mob. The Chinese Exclusion Act, an act which banned Chinese immigration from 1882 to 1943. The Rock Springs Massacre, the persecution of people of Asian descent during the San Francisco Plague. So even that, this whole like blaming Asian folks for the plague is not new. Colonization of the Philippines, the internment of people of Japanese descent in American concentration camps, the U.S. occupation of South Korea, and bombardment of North Korea, which again gets left out of a lot of our narratives about how North Korea is dangerous. Don't forget, in the Korean War, the American military and Air Force basically flattened North Korea and destroyed almost all of their infrastructure and thousands of innocent lives. The U.S. backed and supported genocides in many parts of Southeast Asia, most predominantly in Indonesia during the years of 1965 through 66, war in Vietnam, obviously, and a shifting of blame for the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic and the state-sanctioned increase in both the discourse and practice of anti-Asian violence. So again, there are some much deeper pathologies that go into these things that we are discussing. And I think it is worth talking about kind of the cultural root and the cultural rot that brings us to situations like this where innocent people are getting killed in these racially motivated attacks.